Hey everyone! How many times have we heard about the best soundtracks in the RPG genre? You know, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger, Bloodborne, Pokémon. Okay, we could name plenty of those games. But what about the cool soundtracks from RPGs that most people ignore? This is a small list of those fantastic soundtracks. Just keep in mind that I won't jump into game mechanics, story, and details like that. And this is just my opinion. Without further ado, let's begin. I believe Skelter Nightmares has a quite unique soundtrack. Since the beginning, it hits with a really goofy track, something reminiscent to a circus. Then it hits with a music box, and like that, each labyrinth track delivers a different feeling. To me, that was something quite surprising, as oftentimes these kinds of games share a similar execution throughout the whole journey, but this wasn't the case. Of course, it doesn't end there, as some of these combat themes share a lot of strength with tunes like Soldier of the Wind, Metallic Bowfight, and The Banquet of the Gods Who Hold Out Justice. If you're into rock and metal, I am almost sure you will love those themes, as they combine the electric guitar, piano, violin, and so on in an amazing way. At least, I could say that I can listen to Soldier of the Wind hours upon hours. This soundtrack has 31 tracks, where I could say most of them are quite amazing and interesting to listen to. Yeah, I won't deny that this Idea Factory game has some questionable ideas, but its soundtrack is something I definitely recommend. Cry Machina is a game that I may not recommend, as its story goes all over the place, without taking a defined path, so it can feel like wasted potential, considering that it began with some interesting ideas. And while I consider its narrative as something forgettable, its soundtrack is something I still listen from time to time, as I enjoy a good electronic track, and this is where Cry Machina shines the most. It shares some beautiful tunes. Yes, I've said it in other videos that electronic isn't particularly my jam, but there is something I appreciate a lot here, as this OST delivers different kinds of executions. Some are kinda nostalgic, as Blue Fairy, Hello Shattered Cradle World, Ark Garden, The Dark Theme, while others punch with creative rhythms, as It's Trinity, Survive, and Valiant. Unfortunately, I don't know how to express some of those ideas because of the lack of knowledge within electronic, but I can definitely recommend this OST. It is also worth mentioning that I may not be the biggest of fans when there are vocals. However, some songs like Fight, 6 Deus Ex Machina Logos, and 7 Deus Ex Machina Zoe were of my liking, particularly that Logos track. And this soundtrack has 45 tracks, going for around 2 hours. What is cool is that some compositions are kinda lengthy and interesting. When we talk about Tenpei Sato, I am sure that Disgaea is the first OST that comes to mind, but that SRPG is well known. And for those who know I enjoy the RPGs, nope, I won't talk about Labyrinth of Refrain. So let's take another step backwards with The Witch and the 100 Nights. This OST has 43 tracks and takes like 1 hour and a half. The way in which the 100 Nights and Refrain were composed is rather similar, as Tenpei Sato tends to use some choirs, accordions, marimbas, sometimes guitars, percussions, and stuff like that, but in a way that it sounds like you're in a circus. Well, in any case, that isn't the whole story. Sometimes there are some interesting jazzy compositions, or melancholic tunes in between. Despite its particular nature, I believe its level of composition goes above plenty of OSTs. If those ideas sound of your liking, I do recommend you to give it a check. It delivers a unique experience. Another excellent soundtrack we don't get to hear many people talk about is Tokyo Sana Duets. If you've heard other Falcom works and you enjoy them, then I'm sure you will fall in love with this OST too. as it is quite massive, having 95 tracks that go for around 3 hours without being looped. And oh boy, Falcom knows how to deliver amazing tunes, as it is quite dynamic. It is kinda reminiscent to Trails of Cold Steel, but jumping slightly more into the electronic route, or at least that is my feeling. However, you know that you will listen to some jazz, rock, ambience, and much more. If I had to name some of those pieces I enjoy the most, I will say Infinite Expanse, Immemorial Sanctuary, Hazy Moon, Beyond the Day to Day, The Pain of Kindness, and Sensual Predicament. They are simply gorgeous. Tokyo Sana Duets may be a so-so game, but I won't deny that its soundtrack was beautiful in so many ways, and with plenty of tracks, I am sure you would find multiple pieces worth listening to. In this channel I have shared multiple Experience Inc. games, and while I can recommend plenty of those OSTs, the one I don't hear that much about is Operation Babel. If you follow this channel for a while, I have shared this game a couple of times, as I believe it delivers a quite interesting tale and gameplay within the RPGs. In any case, what's nice about Operation Babel is that its soundtrack is simply beautiful, having over 60 tracks that go for around 3 hours. As far as I know, Naoaki Jimbo composes everything in Experience Inc. And yeah, I simply love each soundtrack a lot. Now, what's interesting about Operation Babel is that it delivers some unnerving tracks inside some dungeons as the hospital, or the first area you see in Abyss. But what takes the cherry are the combat themes, particularly boss ones, as they tend to be quite interesting compositions between electronic and orchestral arrangements with some choirs. If you are into that kind of compositions plus some martial and kind of anime intro tunes, then it's going to be of your liking, as it shares multiple ideas quite well. The Alliance Alive is a turn-based RPG that passes under the water. Even with its remastered version, few are the times you listen someone talk about this entry, and I don't blame anyone. It has some interesting ideas, but it can be a bit hollow in some moments. Whatever the case, what made me appreciate this experience a lot was its OST. Rather than throwing your usual JRPG experience, it is more about ambience. This is an OST that you can place on the background and perform other activities. The deal with this soundtrack is that it is quite packed, having 58 tracks, going for around 3 hours and a half, where most compositions take like 4 minutes, which is something terrific. Now, the way they combined this soundtrack is rather interesting, because in general they are quite calm, having some keyboards, strings, percussion, and sometimes effects like wind sounds. It is something to behold. And once you reach the second half of the game, you get to hear some moved compositions. They have similar ideas, but they turn much more dynamic. Despite being a JRPG that is oftentimes received as slightly above decent, I consider its tunes worth checking out. An OST that impressed me so much was Seven Dragon Code BFD. This soundtrack is a must if you enjoyed moved electronic rhythms. In general, I could say that since the beginning, Seven Dragon sets itself apart from plenty of JRPG soundtracks, as it delivers amazing ideas. Personally, I loved Atlantica, The Emerald Afterglow, Tokyo, Cascade Ordeals, Battlefield UE 77, Battlefield Eden, Berg, Ultimate Sea Palace, among many others. And from those 45 tracks that go for around 2 hours and a half, with these, 36 of them were quite amazing. There is a nice variety of compositions, as some of them fall into cheery ideas, while others radically move to something tragic and sad. But what impressed me the most were the combat themes. To me they became unforgettable. Yuzo Koshiro did an amazing job in Seven Dragon 3. Of course, if you enjoy this soundtrack, I also recommend checking the previous works, the first game for the DS and the second for PSP. In this last section of the video, let's dive into some unique executions. On its own, JRPGs oftentimes rely on neoclassic metal or different mixes between electronic. But on the other side of the world, or Western RPGs, tend to deliver soundtracks closer to ballads, waltz, the Renaissance, etc. etc. The Dungeon of Nahel book shares that kind of experience. Unfortunately, it has a short soundtrack, but I believe it delivers quite nicely with those 26 tracks and almost 1 hour and a half. From time to time, I enjoy to listen to those fantastic OSTs. In this case, it is all about lengthy compositions. In general, they last for around 3 minutes and a half. Some others are much more dynamic, going for around 5 or 10 minutes. For example, Blows and Wounds, Hard Skin, Green Skin, damn, that's a large foe. So, if you're into this kind of soundtracks, I recommend you to give it a check. In the 9th stop, I wanna share Starcrawlers. Unfortunately, it is another small OST with 28 tracks, but if you're into jazz, then you're going to love these compositions, as they are quite lengthy, and they don't really feel like they are part of a video game. Well, some are kinda reminiscent to space themes, but aside from that, they are super chill in general. Dog Sesame, The Wire, The Fringe feel like elevator tracks to pass some time while relaxing. On the other hand, Mid-Shield, Hit the Deck, and Emergency Procurement share some nice jazz fusion melodies. While they are short, I still consider they are quite cool. If you like that kind of ideas, then this is going to be a soundtrack for you, as it is quite consistent. Few are the compositions that share a different feeling. And in our last stop, I am the kind of person who likes to chill while listening to music like Etro and Odyssey. Yeah, in general those Labyrinth share chill jazzy tunes, but Etro and Odyssey is well known. So, After Image is another interesting choice. Now, I have to be honest. In game setting, this OST feels a bit underwhelming, as it is really chill. But if you use it as a form to relax after a stressful day, oof, then it is terrific. Despite having 54 tracks, it is quite short, going for around 1 hour and a half, but once you get to hear track after track, they are really consistent one after another, with some baroque approaches. Personally, I love to listen to Rubywood, Rainbow Plains, Resting Path, Resting Town, Emerald Falls, Field of Geo, among others. This OST is something you don't hear every day, and because of that, I recommend it. With this, I hope you found this video informative, and maybe you can enjoy some other amazing OSTs to have a blast in your day-to-day activities. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.